Imagine walking into the world's most luxurious hotel. Gleaming marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staff in immaculate uniforms. Now imagine being violently thrown out just because of how you look. That's exactly what happened to a man who appeared homeless at the renowned Monarch Palace Hotel. The staff humiliated him, mocked him, and had security drag him away. Just another sad story of discrimination, right? Wrong. What the hotel staff didn't know was that the disheveled man they treated with such contempt wasn't just another unfortunate soul seeking shelter. He was Richard Hayes, the billionaire CEO who owned the entire hotel chain. And he had been watching, recording, and taking notes on every cruel word, every dismissive glance. "Get him out of here," sneered the ambitious assistant manager, not realizing her career was about to implode spectacularly. People like him are bad for business. She had no idea that her words were being spoken directly to the man who built the business. Some say revenge is a dish best served cold. But in this case, it was served with a side of perfect justice. What happens when the ultimate power player decides to teach his own staff a lesson in humanity they'll never forget? The sun rose over the gleaming towers of the Monarch Palace Hotel, its golden rays reflecting off the pristine glass facade. Inside the lavish penthouse suite on the top floor, Richard Hayes stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the city he had conquered over his decades-long career. At 58, the billionaire CEO of Horizon Hospitality Group had built an empire of luxury accommodations spanning 6 continents. Richard adjusted his custom-tailored suit and ran a hand through his silver hair. The board meeting yesterday had been troubling. Customer satisfaction scores at the flagship Monarch Palace were slipping, with complaints about inconsistent service quality. Something was wrong, and he needed to find out what. His executive assistant, Talia Rodriguez, knocked and entered the suite, tablet in hand. "Your schedule is clear for the next 3 days as requested," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "Are you sure about this, sir? There are more conventional ways to evaluate hotel performance." Richard smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Mystery shoppers and performance reviews only show us what people do when they know they're being watched. I want to see the truth, Talia. I want to know who we really are when no one's looking. And you think becoming homeless for 3 days will show you that?" Talia asked skeptically. "Not homeless," Richard corrected. "Just a man down on his luck, looking for basic human dignity. Our company mission statement promises luxury to all who enter, regardless of appearance or status. I want to see if we live up to that promise." Talia sighed, knowing there was no talking her boss out of a decision once it was made. "The items you requested are in the guest bedroom. I still think this is extreme." "The best insights often come from extreme measures," Richard replied, walking toward the guest room. "No one except you knows about this experiment. Not even Theodore." Inside the guest bedroom lay the elements of his transformation. Thrift store clothes that had been deliberately worn and dirted, a gray wig that would extend his hair into an unkempt mess, makeup to create the appearance of weathered skin, and adhesive to alter the shape of his nose slightly. Over the next hour, Richard Hayes disappeared and Ray emerged. Richard studied his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him bore little resemblance to the billionaire CEO whose face graced magazine covers and business journals. His normally immaculate silver hair was now an unruly gray mane. His clean-shaven face sprouted patchy stubble. His tailored suit had been replaced by layers of mismatched, stained clothing. "I wouldn't recognize me either," he murmured. Talia gasped when he emerged from the room. "The resemblance is non-existent." "But sir, what if something happens? What if you need help?" Richard pulled out an old flip phone. "Burner phone. Your number is the only one programmed in. I'll check in every evening, but otherwise I'm on my own. That's the point." He gathered a small backpack containing a few essential items and headed for the service elevator that would take him to the back alley behind the hotel. As the doors closed on Talia's worried face, Richard felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with exhilaration. It had been decades since he'd experienced life without the buffer of wealth and privilege. The back alley was a stark contrast to the opulence inside. Service workers on smoke breaks barely glanced at him as he shuffled past, already invisible. Richard took a deep breath and walked around the block, approaching the grand entrance of his own hotel from the street. The Monarch Palace stood like a gleaming jewel, doormen in crisp uniforms attending to guests arriving in luxury vehicles. Richard shuffled toward the entrance, his shoulders hunched, his gait unsteady. He'd practiced this walk, studied the subtle body language of people who had been worn down by life. The doorman, a young man named Jason according to his nameplate, stiffened as Richard approached. His welcoming smile faltered and then disappeared entirely. "Can I help you?" Jason asked, stepping slightly in front of the door. Richard kept his eyes downcast, his voice rough and uncertain. I need to speak to someone about a room. Just for tonight." Jason glanced nervously toward his colleague, an older doorman who was busy with a couple emerging from a limousine. "Sir, I don't think. This isn't really." Jason stammered before straightening his posture. "The Monarch Palace might not be what you're looking for. There's a shelter about 10 blocks east that might be more suitable." Richard felt a pang of disappointment, but pressed on. "Please, I have money." He pulled out a crumpled $50 bill from his pocket. "Not enough for the whole night, maybe, but just to sit somewhere warm for a while. Maybe use the bathroom." Jason's expression softened slightly, but he shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but I have strict instructions. Hotel facilities are for guests only." Before Richard could respond, a sharp voice cut through their conversation. "Is there a problem here, Jason?" A woman in her early 30s approached, her black suit impeccably pressed, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. The assistant manager badge on her blazer identified her as Veronica Winters. "No problem, Ms. Winters," Jason replied. "I was just explaining to this gentleman that—" "I can see what's happening," Veronica interrupted, her gaze sweeping dismissively over Richard. "Sir, this is a 5-star establishment. We cannot have you loitering here. Please move along before I'm forced to call security." Richard kept in character, his voice meek. "I just need a place to warm up. Maybe use the facilities? I have money." He held out the crumpled bill again. Veronica's lip curled in disgust. $50 wouldn't get you 15 minutes in our lobby, let alone access to our facilities. This hotel has a reputation to maintain. A small crowd of guests had gathered near the entrance, watching the exchange with expressions ranging from discomfort to outright disdain. Richard noticed a young couple whispering to each other, the woman looking at him with pity. "Please," Richard said, allowing his voice to crack slightly. "It's going to rain tonight." "That's hardly my concern," Veronica replied coldly. She turned to Jason. "Call Dominic. Now." Jason hesitated, glancing at Richard with uncertainty before walking a few steps away to make the call. Richard stood his ground, inwardly shocked at the treatment. He had personally trained all management staff on the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their appearance or status. The company handbook specifically outlined protocols for respectfully handling situations like this, offering information about nearby shelters, perhaps a warm beverage to go, always maintaining basic human courtesy. Within minutes, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a security uniform approached. His nameplate read Dominic Porter, head of security. Despite being in his mid-40s, Dominic moved with the confidence and authority of someone used to being obeyed. "This is the individual," Veronica said, not even looking at Richard anymore. "Please remove him from the property." Dominic assessed Richard with cold professionalism. "Sir, I need you to leave the premises now." "I just need," Richard began, but Dominic cut him off. "Now, sir, don't make this difficult." His hand moved to rest on his taser, a not-so-subtle threat. The young couple who had been watching now hurried inside, avoiding eye contact. Other guests did the same, the awkward scene apparently ruining the luxury experience they had paid for. Richard felt a burning sensation in his chest, not fear, but rage. This was not what he had built his company to become. Still, he remained in character, shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay. I'm going," he muttered, backing away slowly. As he turned to leave, he heard Veronica's voice behind him, not quite low enough to be private. "Make sure he's blacklisted, Dominic. I don't want to see him or any of his kind hanging around here again. They're bad for business." Richard shuffled away, feeling the weight of their stares on his back. The gray clouds above threatened rain, just as he had predicted. The doorman Jason caught his eye briefly as Richard glanced back, and the young man quickly looked away, shame evident in his expression. Around the corner, out of sight of the hotel entrance, Richard leaned against the wall of a neighboring building. His experiment was yielding results far worse than he had anticipated. In just 10 minutes, he had witnessed a complete betrayal of every value he had tried to instill in his company. He pulled out the flip phone, tempted to call Talia and end this charade immediately. But something stopped him. This was just one interaction with one team member. Perhaps others in the hotel would behave differently. He needed more data before making any decisions. Above him, the sky darkened as the first raindrops began to fall. Richard pulled up the hood of his tattered jacket and walked away from the Monarch Palace, his mind already formulating plans for tomorrow. He found a small coffee shop several blocks away and nursed a cup for hours, observing the other patrons and how the staff treated them based on appearance. The differences were subtle but unmistakable. The lingering attention given to well-dressed customers versus the efficient, minimal service provided to those who looked less affluent. As night fell, Richard checked into a modest motel using cash and his Ray persona. He called Talia from the burner phone, assuring her he was safe but declining to share details of his day's experience. After hanging up, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. Tomorrow, he would return to the Monarch Palace, but this time with a different approach. The humiliation he had experienced today wouldn't be wasted. It would become the catalyst for change, a painful but necessary lesson for those who had forgotten what true hospitality meant. Richard Hayes had built his empire on the principle that luxury wasn't just about marble floors and champagne service. It was about making every human being feel valued. Somewhere along the way, that message had been lost. But he would find it again, even if it meant tearing down and rebuilding everything he had created. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the budget motel room as Richard awoke, his back stiff from the lumpy mattress. For a moment, he forgot his disguise, reaching habitually for his phone to check the markets. Instead, his fingers found the cheap flip phone beside the bed, bringing him back to his reality as Ray. Today would be different. After yesterday's humiliation, Richard had spent the night refining his plan. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, unobtrusive camera disguised as a shirt button. Talia had included it in his supplies, though he had initially dismissed it as unnecessary. Now he understood its value. "Evidence," he murmured, affixing the camera to his tattered jacket. He maintained his disheveled appearance but made one subtle change. A clean handkerchief tucked into his pocket, a small sign of someone trying to maintain dignity despite circumstances. It was a test, a signal for anyone paying attention to the person behind the appearance. The morning commuters barely registered his presence as he made his way back to the Monarch Palace. He stopped at a corner store, purchasing a small cup of coffee with his crumpled bills, establishing himself as someone with at least some means. The elderly shopkeeper treated him with casual indifference, not warm, but not cruel either. Just another customer. As the Monarch Palace came into view, Richard felt his heart rate increase. The grandeur of the building, designed under his direct supervision 5 years ago, now seemed intimidating rather than welcoming. Gold-plated revolving doors, uniformed staff at attention, luxury vehicles pulling up to the curb. All of it created an invisible barrier between the haves and have-nots. Richard positioned himself on a bench across the street, sipping his coffee slowly, observing. The morning shift change was happening. He recognized some faces from yesterday, but many were new. After 30 minutes of watching, he spotted his opportunity. The intimidating Dominic was nowhere to be seen, and the doormen were busy with an influx of business travelers checking out. Richard crossed the street, his camera recording, and slipped through the revolving doors behind a group of tourists. The lobby of the Monarch Palace was a masterpiece of architectural design. Soaring ceilings with crystal chandeliers, marble columns, plush seating areas, and a magnificent fountain as the centerpiece. Richard had personally selected every element to create an atmosphere of approachable luxury. Now, he felt like an intruder in his own creation. Several staff members glanced his way, their expressions shifting from professional welcome to guarded suspicion as they registered his appearance. Richard kept his head down and moved toward the reception desk, where 3 employees were handling checkouts. One of them, a young woman with warm brown eyes and a nameplate reading Emilia Torres, finished with her guest and looked up as Richard approached. Unlike her colleagues, her expression didn't immediately harden. "Good morning," she said, her voice holding the same professional courtesy she had shown the previous well-dressed guest. "How may I help you today?" Richard was momentarily taken aback by the normal greeting. He cleared his throat, staying in character. "Morning, miss. I was wondering if," he began, but was interrupted by a sharp voice from behind him. "You again? I thought I made myself clear yesterday." Richard turned to find Veronica Winters approaching, her face flushed with anger. Several guests in the lobby turned to watch the confrontation, their breakfasts and newspapers momentarily forgotten. "I just needed to ask about," Richard tried again. How did you get past the door? Jason, Veronica called to the young doorman, who approached reluctantly. Didn't Dominic put this individual on the blacklist yesterday? Jason shifted uncomfortably. Yes, Ms. Winters, but I was helping with luggage when he came in. I didn't see him. Veronica turned her glare back to Richard. Sir, we've been more than patient. This is private property, and you are not welcome here. From behind the desk, Amelia spoke up. Ms. Winters, perhaps I could just answer his question? It would only take a moment. The look Veronica gave Amelia could have frozen fire. Ms. Torres, you have guests waiting. I'll handle this situation. She turned back to Richard, lowering her voice to a threatening whisper. Leave now, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Richard noticed a small gathering of staff watching from various points in the lobby. Their expressions ranged from discomfort to outright agreement with Veronica. No one else spoke up. I just need some information about, Richard persisted. Security. Veronica called loudly, causing several guests to jump. A different security officer than yesterday appeared. A younger man who looked uncertain but determined to do his job. Please escort this person off the premises immediately, Veronica ordered. And call the police if there's any resistance. The security officer approached, his hand hovering near his radio. Sir, I need you to come with me. Richard stood his ground, speaking clearly and with purpose now. I would like to speak to the hotel manager. Veronica laughed, the sound brittle and cold. The manager? Mr. Bennett is far too busy to deal with loiterers. Besides, he's preparing for an important interview today. She straightened her blazer smugly. Some of us are being considered for advancement in the company. The implication was clear. Veronica expected to be promoted. Richard felt a chill run through him. This woman, the antithesis of everything his company stood for, was being considered for greater responsibility? The security officer placed a hand on Richard's arm. Sir, please. Wait, came Amelia's voice again. She had stepped out from behind the reception desk and approached them. Ms. Winters, our policy states that any request to speak to management should be accommodated or formally logged. I can take this gentleman to the waiting area and notify Mr. Bennett's office. Veronica's expression shifted from anger to something more calculated and dangerous. Amelia, may I remind you that your probationary period isn't over? Your continued employment here depends on your ability to recognize threats to our establishment. The lobby had grown quiet, guests and staff alike watching the drama unfold. Richard observed Amelia carefully, seeing the internal struggle play across her features. Her job was clearly on the line. I understand, Ms. Winters, Amelia replied steadily. But I also understand our company values as outlined in orientation. Dignity for all who enter our doors. That was the first principle we were taught. Veronica's face darkened. You're making a very poor career choice right now, Ms. Torres. Perhaps, Amelia agreed. Then, turning to Richard, she said, Sir, would you like a glass of water while we sort this out? The simple offer of water, a basic courtesy extended to any human being regardless of status, was exactly what Richard had been testing for. In that moment, Amelia Torres embodied everything the Horizon Hospitality Group was meant to stand for. Veronica snapped. That's it. You're fired, Ms. Torres. Clear out your locker and leave your badge at HR. A collective gasp went through the gathered staff. Even some guests looked appalled at the public firing. On what grounds? Amelia asked, her voice shaking slightly but her posture remaining tall. Insubordination. Failure to adhere to security protocols. Take your pick. Veronica turned to the security officer. Jackson, please escort both of them out. The young security officer named Jackson looked deeply uncomfortable now. Ms. Winters, I'm not sure if I have the authority to remove staff without. I am the senior manager on duty, and I am giving you a direct order, Veronica hissed. Richard had seen enough. This had gone too far. He raised his hand slowly, drawing all eyes to him. That won't be necessary, he said, his voice no longer meek but resonant with authority. Veronica glared at him. You don't give orders here, you. Actually, Richard interrupted, reaching up to remove the gray wig and adhesive that altered his features. I do. A stunned silence fell over the lobby as Richard Hayes emerged from his disguise. He straightened his posture, wiped some of the makeup from his face with the clean handkerchief, and fixed Veronica with a steady gaze. Richard Hayes, CEO of Horizon Hospitality Group and owner of this hotel. I believe you were expecting me today, Ms. Winters? For an interview. The color drained from Veronica's face. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. Around them, staff members stared in shock, some covering their mouths, others exchanging wide-eyed glances. Amelia Torres looked as though she might faint. "Mr. Hayes? But how, why?" Richard smiled gently at her. "Quality control, Ms. Torres. The most effective kind." He turned back to Veronica, whose complexion had gone from pale to ashen. "I believe we have some matters to discuss, Ms. Winters. And Mr. Bennett should join us." As if on cue, the elevator doors opened and Theodore Bennett, the 61-year-old hotel manager, stepped out. His normally composed expression faltered when he saw the scene before him. "Richard, what on earth is going on?" Theodore asked, taking in his employer's strange, half-disguised appearance and the shocked faces of everyone present. "An unscheduled performance review, Theodore," Richard replied evenly. "One that has been most illuminating." Veronica finally found her voice. "Mr. Hayes, I can explain. This individual, you, were causing a disturbance, and I was simply following protocol to—" "Protocol," Richard repeated, the word heavy with disappointment. "Ms. Winters, the protocol of this company has always been clear. We treat every human being with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived status." Richard turned to address the gathered staff and guests. "I founded this company 30 years ago with a simple principle. True luxury isn't about exclusivity, it's about making everyone feel valued. Somewhere along the way, it seems that message has been forgotten by some." He gestured toward the ornate surroundings. "All of this, the marble, the crystal, the gold, means nothing if we lose our humanity in the process." Veronica's expression had shifted from shock to calculation. Richard could almost see her mind working, trying to find a way to salvage the situation. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice taking on a placating tone, "I was simply trying to maintain the standards of excellence that you've established. This hotel caters to a certain clientele, and we must ensure their experience is untainted by unfortunate elements." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Unfortunate elements? You mean human beings who might be experiencing hardship?" "I only meant—" "I know exactly what you meant," Richard cut her off. He turned to Theodore. "The board members who were supposed to observe Ms. Winters' interview today, are they here?" Theodore nodded, looking grim. "Conference room B. They've been watching everything via the security feed for the past 20 minutes. It was part of the evaluation process we discussed last month, observing candidates in their natural work environment before the formal interview." This revelation caused Veronica to sway slightly on her feet. They saw everything?" "Every word," Theodore confirmed. "It was your idea, Richard, to assess candidates based on how they treat people when they think no one important is watching." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Veronica's ambition had led her to create the perfect circumstances for her own downfall. Richard looked at the security officer, Jackson, who stood awkwardly to the side. "Please escort Ms. Winters to HR to begin her exit process." "Mr. Hayes, please," Veronica pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. "I've given 5 years to this company. My record is impeccable. You can't judge me based on one misunderstanding." Richard regarded her thoughtfully. "It's not just today, Ms. Winters. Your behavior today was merely a symptom of a larger problem. According to your file, guest satisfaction scores for interactions with you have been declining for months. 6 staff members have requested transfers to avoid working under your supervision. But we missed these warning signs because, on paper, your departments are profitable and efficient." He sighed heavily. "I failed as a leader by valuing those metrics over the human element. That ends today." Jackson stepped forward. "Ms. Winters? Please come with me." As Veronica was led away, her face a mask of humiliation and rage, Richard turned to Amelia Torres, who still stood rooted to the spot. "Ms. Torres, I believe you were in the middle of offering me a glass of water?" Amelia blinked rapidly, trying to process everything that had happened. "Yes, Mr. Hayes. Right away. And after that," Richard continued, "I'd like to discuss your future with this company. It seems we have a management position that has just become available." The conference room fell silent as Richard Hayes took his seat at the head of the table. Gone were the tattered clothes and disheveled appearance, replaced by a suit brought by Talia, who had arrived minutes after his reveal. Around the table sat the board members, Theodore Bennett, and a still-stunned Amelia Torres. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice commanding the room instantly, "what you witnessed today was not planned as a spectacle, but as a necessary evaluation of who we've become as a company." He gestured to several tablets on the table displaying security footage from the past 2 days. This experiment revealed something disturbing. We've created beautiful hotels while forgetting the heart of hospitality. One of the board members, Victoria Lawson, leaned forward. Richard, while this was certainly unconventional, was it necessary to humiliate Ms. Winters so publicly? Richard's expression remained firm. Ms. Winters humiliated herself through her actions. More importantly, she humiliated our company and everything we stand for. He turned to Theodore. How long has this culture of elitism been festering in our flagship hotel? Theodore looked genuinely remorseful. It's been gradual. Veronica was efficient, drove strong numbers. When guests complained about her attitude, I dismissed it as perfectionism. I failed to see she was systematically promoting people who shared her worldview. A failure I share, Richard acknowledged. We became so focused on luxury that we forgot compassion is the ultimate luxury. He turned to Amelia, who sat quietly at the end of the table. Ms. Torres, how long have you worked for us? 11 months, sir, she replied, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. And during that time, have you always extended basic courtesies to all guests, regardless of appearance? Amelia nodded. Of course. That's just human decency. Nothing special. Richard smiled. That's precisely what makes it special. Tell me, have you noticed others being treated differently based on appearances? Amelia hesitated, glancing at Theodore. Complete honesty, please, Richard encouraged. No repercussions. Yes, she admitted. There's an unofficial code. Veronica called it resource allocation, giving attention to guests who look like they belong. Anyone else gets the minimum service or is dissuaded from staying. The board members exchanged troubled glances. This directly contradicted the company's founding principles. What happens when these undesirable individuals aren't around? Richard pressed. Veronica would sometimes mock them at staff meetings, using them as examples of people to manage out of the hotel, Amelia replied. She kept a list of techniques to make them uncomfortable enough to leave without creating a scene. Richard's jaw tightened. And this was common knowledge? For some. Those who objected found themselves assigned to undesirable shifts or stations. Eventually, many quit. Before anyone could respond, the door opened. A young woman from HR entered, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation with Ms. Winters. Richard nodded for her to continue. She's refusing to leave, demanding to speak with you. She's also threatened legal action for wrongful termination. Richard exchanged glances with the board members before nodding. Send her in. This needs resolution. Moments later, Veronica entered, her composure partially restored though her eyes burned with indignation. Mr. Hayes, the board, she acknowledged stiffly. I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding. Is there? Richard asked calmly. I've served this company loyally for years. My record speaks for itself. Highest efficiency ratings, lowest operational costs, excellent revenue growth. One mishandled situation shouldn't erase that. Richard leaned back in his chair. Ms. Winters, do you understand why you're being terminated? Because I failed to recognize you, she replied immediately. An honest mistake anyone could make given your disguise. No, Richard said. You're being terminated because you failed to recognize humanity. You would have treated any person the way you treated me, with contempt, dismissal, and cruelty. I was protecting our brand, Veronica insisted. Our clientele expects a certain environment. Our clientele expects exceptional hospitality, Richard corrected. True hospitality is extended to everyone. That was the foundation of this company. He reached for a folder and opened it. Your personnel file shows a pattern. Guest complaints citing rudeness to service workers in their presence. Staff turnover in your departments nearly triple the company average. Yet your quarterly reports show record profits. Exactly my point, Veronica interjected. Results matter. How did you achieve those results, Ms. Winters? Richard asked quietly. Efficiency, excellence, attention to detail. And cutting corners on maintenance, understaffing shifts, and denying legitimate expense reimbursements to staff, Richard added, reading from the file. That's not success, it's exploitation. The color drained from Veronica's face. Those were approved cost-saving measures. By whom? Certainly not by me, Theodore said, looking stricken. Richard closed the file. Ms. Winters, your termination stands. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. You'll regret this, Veronica hissed, her mask of professionalism slipping. I know things about how this hotel really operates. So do I, Richard replied calmly. That's why changes begin today. After Veronica was escorted out, Richard addressed the room. I've neglected what matters most in our company. Today marks a new beginning. 6 months later, the Monarch Palace Hotel had undergone a transformation. Under Amelia's leadership as the new community engagement director, the hotel launched Monarch Wings, a program providing hospitality training and employment opportunities to people experiencing homelessness. Richard stood in the newly redesigned lobby, watching as graduates of the first training cohort received their certificates. The space now featured a community gathering area where local artists displayed their work and where, once weekly, the hotel hosted free dinners for anyone in need. The quarterly figures are in, Theodore said, approaching with a tablet. Profits are up 17% since the program launched. Turns out, guests like staying at a hotel with a conscience. Richard nodded, unsurprised. And staff turnover? Lowest in 5 years. Morale is off the charts. Amelia joined them, beaming with pride at her graduates. Mr. Hayes, there's someone here to see you. She gestured toward the entrance where a familiar figure stood hesitantly. Veronica Winters, but drastically changed. Her designer clothes had been replaced by worn but clean business attire. Her haughty confidence was gone. She came to apply for the program, Amelia explained quietly. Lost her apartment 3 months ago. No one in the industry would hire her. Richard watched as Veronica noticed him and froze, clearly contemplating retreat. What did you tell her? Richard asked. That everyone deserves a second chance, Amelia replied. Just like you taught me. Richard approached Veronica, who stiffened defensively. Ms. Winters, he acknowledged. I understand you're interested in our program. I didn't know you would be here, she said stiffly. I'll go. No, Richard replied. Everyone is welcome here now. Actually welcome, not just tolerated. Veronica's composure cracked slightly. Why would you help me after what I did? Because 6 months ago, someone offered me water when I appeared to have nothing, Richard answered. That simple act of dignity reminded me what matters. Everyone deserves that reminder. He extended his hand. Welcome to the Monarch Wings program, Ms. Winters. I think you'll find it transformative. As Veronica hesitantly shook his hand, Richard addressed the gathered graduates. Many of you don't know this, but 30 years ago, before Horizon Hospitality existed, I spent 8 months living in my car. A single act of kindness from a hotel manager who saw my potential changed everything. I built this company to pay that kindness forward. He looked around the lobby, at the staff who now treated everyone with equal respect, at the graduates beginning new lives, at Veronica who stood on the threshold of redemption. True luxury isn't marble floors or champagne, Richard concluded. It's the feeling that you matter. That's what we offer here, to everyone who walks through our doors.